Good morning, everyone. You know, in our culture, we often hear a call, a voice to self-reliance and to independence. As Americans, we pride that independence, that do-it-yourself attitude, not relying on others, but knowing that we can forge ahead, relying on our freedom and our own abilities. There are strong forces within our culture that, if you will, pushes us towards this self-reliance mentality. I can do it alone. This sharply contrasts with the gospel today. Listen again to what our Lord says in the gospel. Remain in me, Jesus says, as I remain in you. Just as a branch cannot bear fruit on its own unless it remains on the vine, so neither can you unless you remain in me. Because without me, you can do nothing. That's very profound and very true. We can do nothing. Our Lord doesn't say you can do some things. You can make it on your own to a certain point. No, He's very categorical in saying you can do nothing without me. You're the branches. I am the vine. Without the life-giving sap that I give you, without remaining in me, you can do nothing. Our entire existence, in other words, our very life breath, depends utterly and completely upon one person, Jesus Christ. That's a very radical message, isn't it? It's a very challenging one as well. Because unlike a branch that's on a vine, we have a choice. We can choose to cut ourselves off from the sap that is Christ. We can separate ourselves from the vine. We can try to do it on our own. But our Lord says that nothing of true worth, of value, of His life is in us unless we remain in Him and He remains in us. Now, as I said, this is a very radical message, isn't it? How many great figures in history could we say, without this person I cannot live, I can't do anything? I mean, we might admire great historical figures like, Julius Caesar. And we see what a great military man and soldier and leader he was. We might admire other world religious figures, Mahatma Gandhi, for instance. We might admire political figures like Thomas Jefferson. But how many of them can we say, without Thomas Jefferson, I can do nothing? Everything exists because Jesus Christ exists. We have our very being because of Him. Take away air that we breathe and we die. Take away Jesus Christ and everything becomes nothing. Without Him, we can do nothing. But here's the challenge. The challenge is, how do we live this dependence upon Christ? Because we can choose not to. We can choose to separate ourselves from the vine, as I said, and make it out on our own. But our Lord is saying to us that my Father is glorified when you bear much fruit and become my disciples. So how do we become His disciples? How can we put this complete dependence upon God into action? Well, let me give you an example. An example going back to the 3rd century of a Roman centurion by the name of Marcellus. Marcellus was a career soldier. And at a certain point in his life, he embraced the Catholic faith. And he began to live it out in his daily life. As he did so, he noticed more and more the decadence of the Roman culture around him. During a particular feast in honor of the emperor's birthday. Marcellus became so disgusted with the excesses of Romans of his time that he took off the insignia of his rank from his uniform and he threw it on the ground and walked out. This, of course, was considered to be a capital offense. He was arrested, tried, and found guilty. In his defense, he said the following: I serve Jesus Christ, the eternal King. I will no longer serve your emperors, and I scorn to worship your gods of wood and stone, which are deaf and dumb idols. His whole life had been centered on Christ, from whom he received life itself. He knew that he could do nothing without him, and that he could no longer worship false idols and live a decadent lifestyle, because Christ had become everything to him. He had put our Lord at the center of his life, and he, our Lord, became the very fulcrum upon which he made all his decisions and with which he did all of his actions. The Lord truly was the vine, and he was the branch. Remain in me as I remain in you, because without me, you can do nothing. Well, we might not have that same challenge and even that same opportunity to become a martyr. But how do we put this complete dependence of Christ into our life, our daily life? Well, that brings me back to the Bishop's annual appeal. In the first letter of John, our second reading, it is St. John who tells us that our Lord commands us to believe in him and to love one another just as he commanded us. You see, living the love of our neighbor is the way of putting Christ in the center of our life. St. Catherine of Siena, the great patron saint of our parish, said once that the reason why God gives us our neighbor is so that we might love him in our neighbor. Think about that for a moment. The reason why we have each other, our neighbor, is so that we might show God our love in our neighbor. That's the very reason we have each other. The Bishop's annual appeal is a moment and an opportunity for us to look at our neighbor, especially our needy neighbor, and recognize the Lord, knowing that through our generosity and our goodness, we are dealing with and loving Christ in our neighbor by the generosity that we give. Giving money is not an unimportant matter. It really tells us where our priorities are when we give money to a cause, to a person, to a movement, to an organization. Where is our importance? Where do we wish to put our priorities? And I would invite you all to consider giving to the Bishop's annual appeal within that context, allowing it to become an opportunity for you and for me to put Christ in the center of my life and to love him in my neighbor. When we give to the Bishop's annual appeal, we give to those in need of adult formation. We give to those seminarians and retired priests who need our support. We give to those students who have to attend special learning centers. We support Hispanic ministry, youth and young adult activities. We are giving bread and shelter to the hungry and the homeless. How can I not share with my brother and sister in need when I know that all that I have, my very existence, comes from God himself, and that I completely depend on him? Yes, my brothers and sisters, we hear a voice in our culture of becoming very independent and self-reliant. But we know that all that we have, all that we are, is completely dependent on Christ. Without me, Jesus says, you can do nothing. May we center our life around that message and around that person. All of our life is about putting that dependence into action, whether it's the Bishop's annual appeal or whomever comes to us in need. In that way, our Father will be glorified, as Jesus says at the end of the Gospel. We will indeed bear fruit because we have truly become His disciples.